A lot of people maybe want to do entrepreneurship and don't want to do startup. And I think search, people often talk about it as a risk adjusted way to do a startup. Or if you just don't have an idea that you feel full conviction in, but you really want to run something and have your own piece of something, then search fund starts to make a lot of sense as something to think about.
Search Party is sponsored by Avid Bank, Boulay, Mayer Brown, Plexus Capital, and Oberle. The lead sponsor is Next Coast Legacy. Hello and welcome to Search Party. I'm David Snow, your host. We are joined by Laura Kiehl, Ruby Au, and Michelle Nguyen of Stanford Graduate School of Business's ETA Club. Laura, Ruby, and Michelle, welcome to Search Party. Thanks so much for being here. And I can't wait to delve into the ETA Club at Stanford and the resources and the network and the history of the institution. Obviously, it's a very important institution in the relatively brief history of entrepreneurship through acquisition. Why don't we just start with a question about the level of interest at Stanford Business School for ETA. We know that generally ETA has been becoming more and more popular among certain business schools as a career path. And I'm interested if you could provide some color on what the growth of your club has been like. How would you sort of measure its level of popularity?
I think the popularity has risen exponentially. I'm in my second year, so I've been here about a year and a half. When I first got to campus, I remember I stopped by the club booth. I didn't know at the time what a search fund was, and I kind of asked about it. And I saw like a few people also stopping by. And then in comparison, 1 or 2 weekends ago, staffed the booth myself now as a club leader. And this is the class of 2026 coming in the following year. And the entire hour and a half I was there. It was packed. I had a crowd around the table the whole time. I don't want to use myself as N equals 1 data point. It's not a great reference, but when I stopped by the club booth, I didn't know what a search fund was. And I had many people also say similar things to me in terms of, I didn't know what a search fund was when I got to Stanford. And this was just last year, right? This year, when new admits were stopping by the table, people were not only stopping by already knowing what a search fund was, but prepped with questions and asking about it, and asking about thoughts on outreach approach. Should I do an industry-driven approach, or should I really just be sending as many emails as possible? Which took me completely off guard, right? I think for me, that really illustrates how much the popularity has grown in just 1 to 2 years.
I'd say I see a lot of interest in the MBA 1 this year and their knowledge about what search fund is compared to even my year. I'd say because of the very active engagement from our investors who come frequently on campus, we have events almost every week, sometimes twice a week. And a lot of time they also come like casually doing coffee chats with students. That level of engagement, I think, draws people in, as well as creating a pretty welcoming environment for students to explore. I myself didn't know what search fund was when I first got to Stanford. But this year, when I was a peer mentor and I mentored 70 students of the first year, the amount of questions that I got reached out to about search fund, when they're like, oh, Michelle's the president of the search fund club, like the amount of requests that come in to me to understand more about the club. Some people proactively asked about when they can apply to be club leadership and things like that. I was really happy to see that.
I also didn't know what a search fund was before, which I think is a pattern either because we're all equally uneducated. It is a very new investment vehicle in general, right? It's only, 35 years old, 45 years old. So it's still pretty new. But that makes it, I think, extremely exciting. If we take that from the investor side, we also see a lot of growth. I think we've doubled that investor list. And we were just talking the other day that we almost don't have the capacity to get behind all of the inbound requests we're getting from investors reaching out to us, wanting to come on campus, wanting to have coffee chats.
What do you think is behind the rising levels of interest? What is it that students, whether they showed up to business school already knowing what ETA was, or whether they learned about it when they got there, what do you think it is that appeals to them about ETA as a possible career path?
People have now seen that the returns are so good and have been pretty good for the past, couple of years. It just got on people's radar like, oh, that actually is a pretty good option. I think getting easier and easier in terms of actually raising a search fund. There's been, as Laura mentioned, a huge amount of investors who have flooded into the space. We're very lucky that if we wanted to raise a search fund, it's not difficult to raise a search fund. And I certainly don't think that was the case maybe, 10 years ago when there's just not as many investors in the space and not as much money in the space. Stanford has put out studies like Search Fund Primer, Search Fund Study that I think has gotten the name out there. And I also do think there is still, even in pop culture at large, America kind of has a love of entrepreneurship, and startup is not for everyone. But a lot of people maybe want to do entrepreneurship and don't want to do startup. And I think search, people often talk about it as a risk adjusted way to do a startup, or if you just don't have an idea that you feel full conviction in, but you really want to run something and have your own piece of something, then search fund starts to make a lot of sense as something to think about.
I think definitely also it is a point around having role models, having seen people done it, and changing the narrative of what it means to be an entrepreneur. That it doesn't just mean being a tech entrepreneur in the Silicon Valley, but entrepreneurship takes many different forms. And I think that kind of rewrite of the narrative is something that a lot of people feel very connected to and can kind of empathize and want to pursue. In one of our classes, Jim Ellis said, some people want to be kind of a writer and write from like a blank piece of paper from scratch. And other people are really great editors when there's already something like on that blank sheet of paper. And kind of those typical entrepreneurs that we think about, they're more of the first kind, and ETA entrepreneurs are more of the second kind that kind of take something good that's already there and make it even better.
People at Stanford who have become ETA curious. What do you think are some commonalities to the personalities, the life experience, the life goals of people who are attracted to ETA?
I can see a very clear characteristic of a lot of people who got interested in ETA. They're very passionate, they're very ambitious, they want to fast track to CEO. They love operating. A lot of people at Stanford, I would say, love high level of responsibility, high level of autonomy in the work.
I'd love to simply learn more about the Stanford ETA Club. What are its goals? What are the three of you trying to accomplish? What kind of resources do you have available? Just give us a quick tour.
I think when we actually inherited the roles from the students the year above us who were in the leadership role, they kind of joked with us that we would have maybe the easiest jobs comparatively of the many club leaders at the GSB. And that is because we do get so much investor interest. So some of the main activities that we do is we set up what are called brown bag lunches where investors will come. They'll usually provide lunch for the students, and they'll do presentations ranging from what is search to how do you build a great cap table to how do you know if this is the right path for you. So we'll help facilitate those. We'll also help investors set up coffee chats with students. They'll usually come hang out on campus for a day, and students can sign up with the investors in certain time slots. And then we'll try to do socials and get-togethers so that the community has a sense of who else is searching. And, some people are trying to find a partner, and we try to help facilitate in that way. There is so much momentum in this space. We have no shortage of investors reaching out. The Career Center at Stanford is really great at helping us, the club, manage the logistics of getting people connected. The broad idea is to make connections. It's a community at the end of the day. It's an entrepreneurial path at the end of the day. I think there is no formulaic way to do search. And so the best thing that you can do if you're interested in the space is really to get as many coffee chats and as many conversations as possible.
It's almost like the three of you are gatekeepers to a huge amount of demand that's trying to get into the Stanford Business School, investors that want to place their money with, highly skilled ETA searchers. And so I guess in the world of sales, they call that being an order taker, right? Like you're not really getting out there trying to hustle the money. It's kind of coming to you. It sounds kind of like a high-class problem.
Definitely a luxury problem. I don't know if it's a gatekeeper. I think gatekeeper seems almost a little bit like, we're trying to not let the investors in. I think pretty much everyone who kind of requests, we try to accommodate to the best of our abilities. We are kind of like the orchestrator, trying to select based on experience, knowledge, know-how, and just kind of value it to the students, but also to the investors, because we want to make sure it's not just helping our students, but it's also helping the investors to get out what they want to get out at the end of the day as well. So it is really a two-way street in that regard. We do have courses at the GSB that are tailored and streamlined towards search and taught by exceptional professors who kind of are in the space. One is led by Jim Ellis. It's a very prominent name, so it's really, really great to be taught by them. There's also Search Fund Garage, where students, it's less of a lecture format, but it's really about testing out a thesis they have, doing their due diligence and coming up with kind of interim project milestones, simulating that such experience.
What is the profile of the investors that are typically finding their way to Stanford GSB? Are they all Stanford alum, or is it more of a mix?
the investor who find their ways to Stanford is a very mixed bag. Majority of them has some Stanford affiliation, since this is like the ground where search fund model flourished. And so a lot of people became entrepreneurs, search funders themselves. But recently, we have had a lot of interest from investors who are in different parts of the world, who know someone at Stanford who would love to come to talk to our students as well, because this is like one of the best places to find students who are interested in search fund.
An important goal of the ETA Club is to help students kind of understand what a good cap table would look like. Just because someone who has the capital shows up on campus doesn't mean you should necessarily take it.
We also had a session where how to select the best cap table for you. And I think that's the word for you is very important because, for example, I or Ruby or Laura come in and we have very different experience before the GSB. So that means that we also need different kind of mentorship, different gaps that we need to fill in from the search process to the operational process. And that would mean that we also may match with different type of investor who have different skill sets. And we want to make sure that the whole process from searching to operating to exiting are well covered by the cap table. Because it's not just about the searching part, it's also about running and growing that company.
I will say one thing that kind of took me by surprise when I first started talking to search investors. I came from a startup background, and so I was more familiar with startup investors. And in those conversations, you're really pitching an idea, you're pitching yourself, but it felt much more evaluative to me. Whereas I kind of entered my first conversations with search investors and expecting that same frame of reference because they are, at the end of the day, investors. But over time, I think my conversations with investors felt much more like trying to pick a coach if I was going to go into search, which is very, very different from, I think, talking to a VC investor. And that's because, at least I think, the model is different. In search, they are backing you as an entrepreneur. They're not backing a company. They're not backing an idea that you're pitching. And because we are in the fortunate position where we get to meet and interact with so many investors, almost all of them that I've met are incredibly impressive people. And they just come with different skill sets and different backgrounds and different credentials. And so, to Michelle's point, doing the introspection of thinking about who's the coach that I need and who's the person that I want to learn from over the next 10, 15 years, these tend to be really long-term relationships.
Let's take a quick break to learn about a partner for growth in the lower middle market, Plexus Capital. Every Plexus Capital investment begins with a foundation of trust. The team approaches all partnerships through the lens of its CARE values, grounding principles that guide the team's decision-making. Care about our people. Always do what's right. Respect each other and our partners. Expect excellence. Plexus Capital has been providing debt and equity capital to lower middle market businesses since 2005 and began partnering with the search community in 2010. Since inception, the firm has deployed over $2.4 billion into over 190 small businesses. Given the team's expertise and track record, you could say Plexus Capital has large firm capabilities with a small deal focus. Look for commentary from Plexus Capital professionals in episodes of Search Party. Okay, now back to the episode. One interesting thing about ETA Search is, although there is this demand from investors to partner with people like you, it's not like they're offering you a job. What they're offering you is the opportunity to take a risky journey where the risk ultimately is your risk and maybe some of their money. But if someone invests in your search fund, they're giving you typically 2 years to go out and find a high quality lower middle market business to acquire. Ultimately, it's a decision you need to make about, what you want to do with possibly 10 years of your life, which may or may not go exactly where you thought it would go.
You're searching for 2 years, but you don't know, do you find something after 2 years, right? And it's like, is that 2 years something that you quote unquote waste? And then if you do find it, it's kind of the second part of that, which is the longer term commitment of, a search. It's like 5, 8, 10 years. It's not like you're, wasting 2 years because you're sitting around. You're actually doing something, right? You're doing due diligence. You're in contact very deep with different industries. You're developing thesis. You're talking constantly to your investors, to your board members. There's a lot of learning going on. So there isn't, in the end of the day, something that you're just kind of sitting around and wasting 2 years. Juxtaposition that to maybe typical entrepreneurship, you could probably make the exact same argument. You might tinker with an idea. You have initial, angel capital, pre-seed capital, and you tinker with an idea for a year or two, depending on what kind of business you're trying to build. And at the end, you could also find yourself with a failed product, lack of product market fit, etc., and quote unquote have wasted that time, right? It is not a waste of time. You are trying to advance something, to progress with something, and that comes with uncertainty. It is still a difficult journey. Definitely can be just as lonely as startup entrepreneurship, and I think that's why the community aspects becomes so strong, so integral, and is really, really visible and felt for us on campus when we come together with investors. Why we're trying to build the community in that way, to have that support system, because it can undoubtedly still be very difficult.
Michelle, what is your personal background and why did it lead you to ETA Search?
I got almost like a fall in love at first sight with search. The moment I learned about search, I know that I wanted to pursue that path. I grew up in Vietnam and in a household of entrepreneurs. Both my parents are founders and they founded and run their own business. And I witnessed secondhand how hard it is, how difficult, and also how rewarding it is to run a small, medium business. That idea of eventually running a business is very inspiring, and it was instilled in me at a very young age. And I've always come to America with my American dream, and I always thought about like eventually I would do that path. You know, I went to school in Texas, Fort Worth, fell in love with technology, got into tech consulting after for a few years, and then later on, the idea of eventually still wanting to run a company inspired me to jump into technical sales so that I can gain that sales skill. And so I took up that at Microsoft, and after that I went to Stanford GSB. And right now I'm learning as much as possible about the industries that I'm interested in.
So before GSB, I was always in very early stage environments. The first thing I ever did was about a month after graduating undergrad, I moved to Kenya to accept a 6-month fellowship, but just started working on the weekends and off hours on what eventually became an ed tech startup. And I was like 22 at the time. I had no idea what I was doing and probably shouldn't have been left to my own devices, to be honest. But I think having that much responsibility early on, it was hard. Maybe it just ruined me for honest work, right? You just have this incredible experience of being out of your depth, but feeling a huge amount of responsibility, a huge amount of care for people who work for you. I got to stay in East Africa and build out an office for a San Francisco tech company. And again, probably more responsibility than I was ready for. But getting a taste of that and being like, this is so exciting. This is so energizing. I love building. And so by the time I got to Stanford, I knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I thought it had to be startups. Again, I had never heard of a search fund. And when I heard about search funds, I just thought the idea was so interesting because it came with this huge mentorship model. As I said, when I was, early on doing this, I didn't have a board. I didn't have investors. I didn't really have advisors who could tell me what to do. And I felt how hard it was. There was a lot of times that I really feel like I hit a wall and I didn't know what to do. And here there was this model where you have these incredible people who have done this for, decades at times, who are willing to sit down with you and actually are offering to partner with you. So I thought that was really cool. And I thought that was something that was distinctive to search over startup. Right now, I am between the two. And the reason I'm in between the two is because I kind of made a personal commitment that this era when I'm in school is probably the last period I get in a while to just sit and think about a decision without needing to make one immediately. One of the things I really wanted to build as a skill set here is how do you be a good manager? I think at the end of the day, I will pick the option that allows me to build that skill set in the best way, whether that's startup and whether that's search, and which still allows me to do the things that I love, which is I love building. I love having momentum. Like I love being, I think, in relationship with people. I really enjoy being mentored and I really enjoy learning and growing and being challenged. And that's kind of where my head is right now.
So I'm from Europe, I'm from Germany and Poland, and kind of moved to the US just for Stanford, so a little bit over a year ago. Growing up, living in a single parent household, not having a lot of means to kind of start my life with, I learned incredibly from my mom, just being super scrappy, making kind of the best out of every situation, that you actually don't need everything in place to make it work, but you kind of work with what you have and make the best out of it, and that can actually lead to incredible things. And I think that's also why I got really interested in search, because it was a little bit less of that shiny object that everyone, in this bubble was kind of running after, which is Silicon Valley and like the tech startups. When everyone is running to one side, I kind of like to look the other way and see what's there. And having never heard about search before, but then doing my research on it, seeing IRR even with like fluctuation within it is still pretty good. And super intrigued why that also is not as popular as a model in Europe. It does exist or in other parts of the world, but it's just less mature. So got super intrigued by it. Very similar paths, I think, as Michelle and Ruby in terms of going to different BBLs, investor chats, learning more about the model, and then also taking an internship in the summer with a portfolio company. So the mentorship and willingness from the CEO and the whole team for me to learn with that experience. I was very, very grateful for that and absolutely loved it. Similarly, not entirely sure for my path after. Likely, I will not be searching right out of school and don't really see the feasibility in kind of searching for a European business out of the US. I think it's way better when you're localized. And similarly, as we're talking about the longer time period and kind of wanting to commit myself to that, I don't think I should be searching in the US right now.
Is it fun to describe to a new student to Stanford what ETA is? Because every now and then one of them has that eureka moment that Michelle had where she said, oh my God, it's love at first sight. What is this? Wow, where has this been all my life? I want to do it.
Search could be very lonely, could be very stressful. It takes determination as well as optimist attitude, a very can-do attitude to go through the search process. Whenever new students ask me, how do you think about the risk? How do you think about like the journey? And I'm like, well, the best way you learn about it is people actually in the trenches doing it. And so go talk to people who are searching right now because it's binary. You either acquire or you don't. And then once you acquire, you either acquire really good business that you can, help fix and grow, or it's actually the worst case scenario, which is you acquire something that is not good. People can choose and adjust the risk reward in the mindset as they approach the path.
There's no one way to do or be anything. You want to be an entrepreneur? There's not one way. There's ETA, there's startup, there's many other ways to be an entrepreneur. So you don't have to fixate just on the one idea, the one path. Life has so many shades of gray in between. You might acquire, you might not acquire. Neither, obviously you would hope to acquire, but it doesn't mean it is a failure if you don't acquire. Similarly, you could acquire and it could, there's so many things that could like maybe blow out. And then you're like, oh my God, it's a failure. I didn't, have a 2, 3, 4, 5, 10x return or kind of change in that. It doesn't mean it's a complete failure. It doesn't mean, your life is over. It doesn't mean you can never search or be an entrepreneur again. I think my main encouragement would be just to not necessarily just do what everyone else is doing, but kind of trying your own path and experiment with it and, see what happens.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, the three of you, for sharing your perspectives. Laura Kiehl, Ruby Au, and Michelle Nguyen of the Stanford Graduate School of Business Entrepreneurship-Through-Acquisition Club. Thanks so much for being on Search Party, and I hope I can have you back at some point in the future.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Search Party is sponsored by Avid Bank, Boulay, Mayer Brown, Plexus Capital, and Oberle. The lead sponsor is Next Coast Legacy.